All right, welcome back, boys and girls. So today we're going to write our third paragraph, which is our behavior paragraph. So all of our behavioral adaptations that our animals do to survive in their environment. So Mrs. Vassar just left off, and you should have as well, with structures. So in your last sentence of your last paragraph, you should have kind of wrapped up structural adaptations and then also mentioned behavior adaptations. So now we're going to write our topic sentence for behaviors. So this is going to be pretty similar to how you wrote your structural adaptation paragraph. Topic sentence mentioning the 3 or more behaviors that your animal does, and then we'll wrap it up with a conclusion paragraph. So the first thing you want to do is just mention the topic of this paragraph, or the main idea of this paragraph, which again is behavioral adaptations. And there's a number of ways that you can do that. So depending on what you've already written, that's going to affect how you write this sentence. So it's always good to go back and reread what you've written so far so that you're not starting out every paragraph the same way. So I'm going to use the giraffe as my animal for today. I was just talking to Miss Canastro, and we all know how much she loves giraffes, so she inspired me to use the giraffe as my animal. Okay, so I might start my paragraph with, first of all, you want to make sure you hit the tab button so we indent. And let's see. So I might say, using a variety of behavioral adaptations is how the giraffe is able to survive in its environment. So let me just reread that. Using a variety of behavioral adaptations is how the giraffe, I'm going to change this, so enables, just because I feel like I said is a lot. So using a variety of behavioral adaptations enables the giraffe to survive in its environment. So that's one way that we could kind of introduce our topic, which again is behavioral adaptations, or our main idea. And I also started with an ing word, which is good for sentence variety. So you want to also think about how you're starting every sentence, so you're not starting with the, or the same word repeated over time. Another way we could start our sentence is behaving in specific ways helps this, and I might throw in a word reference, long-necked herbivore thrive within the whatever rainforest your animal lives in. And I have a tendency to start a lot of sentences with ing, which is good for sentence variety, but you also want to make sure you're not overusing that. So let me do one more example with not starting with ing. Let's start with a complex sentence. So I'll use one of my Awubis words. So since this animal is threatened in its threatened within its habitat, it is important that they use, or I'm going to change that to utilize, which is just a fancy word for use. They utilize different learned behaviors to help them survive. So since this animal is threatened within its habitat, it is important they utilize different learned behaviors to help them survive. So we have our dependent clause. We know that we need to add that comma, and then we have our independent clause. So we have a complex sentence there. All right, so go ahead and pause this and write your topic sentence. You definitely want to mention something about behaviors, behavioral adaptations, or behaving in specific ways. So go ahead and write your sentence now. Okay, so now we're going to move on to mentioning some of those behavioral adaptations. One way that the giraffe behaves is that it travels in large herds, and that's for protection. So the more the merrier kind of thing here. They all kind of look out for each other so that if predators do come into contact with them, they're able to kind of shield one another. So when I think about animals who travel in packs, I kind of think about like them acting as bodyguards for one another. So I think it might be fun to mention something like that. Again, you want to make your paper a little bit more interesting, a little bit more unique from your peers' work. So I might say something like, in order to protect, or in order to, we'll say protect one another from predators, giraffes travel in large unorganized herds. In this way, they are almost acting as each other's bodyguard. So we could say something like that. And then let me see how we might be able to change this. So you could always start again with an ing word. So you could take the verb here, travel, and say traveling in large unorganized herds is how, let me see, traveling in large unorganized herds is how giraffes, or you could do a word referent there, is how these spotted creatures protect themselves from vicious predators. Another thing that they do, so once you write your first behavior, go ahead actually and pause, write your first behavior, and then we'll come back and write our second behavior. So to write our second behavior, another thing that giraffes do is that they salivate, which is just a fancy word for drool. And the reason why they do that is to kind of get rid of some toxins that they ingest from different kinds of plants and red ants that they eat. So I thought that was pretty interesting. So let's say another behavior, this herbivore, and we can always go back and change out our word reference later. Another behavior this herbivore uses, or actually I'm going to change that, so because this is kind of gross. So believe it or not, these herbivores actually spends a lot of time drooling. Because they salivate, they are able to rid their bodies of toxins ingested from devouring plants and red ants. And again, we have another complex sentence here. So when you go and edit your paper, that's when you're going to look for compound and complex sentences. But I think if while you're writing you can think of them, it's just less work to do later. So believe it or not, these herbivores actually spend a lot of time drooling. Because they salivate, they are able to rid their bodies of toxins ingested from devouring plants and red ants. All right, so go ahead and pause this, write your second adaptation and your third adaptation. So it's going to all go kind of the same way. You want to make sure that you're using prepositional phrases. You're starting your sentences in different ways. So look at just the beginning, first few words, and look at your word reference. And then we can always go back and make minor changes later. Okay, and then finally, we're going to write our conclusion sentence, which again, you want to wrap up what you've talked about and then transition into your next paragraph. So the next paragraph is going to be about the niche or your animal's special job. So you want to, again, mention how they use these behaviors, how they help them to survive so that they're able to perform their job in their ecosystem. So you might say something like, all of these behavioral adaptations help this mammal, and I might put in an adjective, this gentle mammal, all of these behavioral adaptations help this gentle mammal perform its niche or special job within the ecosystem. So again, mentioning using the adaptations to perform the niche or special job. Okay, and another way that we could say that is, it is important that this animal use its learned behaviors in order to carry out its unique job or niche within the rainforest. So again, mentioning behaviors and then also mentioning the job or niche. So for your transition sentence, wrap up using the behaviors and mention how using them helps them carry out their job. And that's going to bring us right into our niche paragraph. Then you want to go back and look at all of this and just make sure, again, that you're using a variety of different word reference and compound and complex sentences. And you want to make sure that you have topic sentence, at least 3 adaptations, and then your transition or conclusion sentence down at the bottom, and you will be good to go. All right, boys and girls, great job.